Chapter 6 Halibut Fishing, Dogfish, A Trip to Fort Rupert, Ransoming a Slave, A Promenade with a Redskin, Bagging a Chief's Head, Queen Charlotte's Islanders at Nanaimo. The halibut, a giant among flatfishes, is taken by the Indians on the western side of Vancouver Island, a veritable ground feeder, frequenting deep-sea sandbanks and devouring anything and everything that comes within reach of its terrible mouth. The halibut at Vancouver Island attains an immense size, 300 pounds, being no unfrequent weight. The Indians are most skillful in securing this leviathan of the deep, as I have had the opportunity of seeing when visiting the northern end of the island. Picture to yourself an Indian village built on a plateau overlooking an open roadstead, a crowd of Indians on the shingly beach watching the departure of a large canoe manned by four Indians, awaiting my arrival. This being a special occasion, they are more elaborately painted than usual. A brief description of one will serve to portray the other three. Tailors are entirely unknown in the land of the Indian. A small piece of blanket or fur tied around the waist constitutes the court, evening, and morning costume of both chief and subject. My crew was kilted with 3 pieces of scarlet blankets. Imagine, if you can, a dark, swarthy, copper-colored figure leaning on a canoe paddle, his jet black hair hanging down nearly to the middle of his back. The front hair being clipped close in straight line across the forehead. Neither beard, whisker, nor mustache ever adorns the face of the Indian, the hair being tweezed out by squaws in early life and thus being destroyed. A line of vermilion extends from the center of the forehead to the tip of the nose, and from this trunk line others radiate over and under the eyes and across the cheeks. Between these red lines, white and blue streaks apparently fill the interstices. A similar pattern ornaments chest, arms, and back, the frescoing being artistically arranged to give apparent width to the chest. The legs and feet are naked. A fire bag, made from the skin of a medicine otter, elaborately decorated with beads, scarlet bells, and brass buttons slung around the neck by a broad belt of wampum, completed the costume of my coxswain. The canoe was what is commonly called a dugout, that is, made from a solid log of wood, coiled around the sharp bow of the canoe like a huge snake, with a strong line about 60 fathoms in length, made from the inner bark of the cypress and neatly twisted, lying along each side, extending far from both bow and stern, were 2 light spear shafts about 60 feet long, while stowed away in the bow were a dozen shorter spears, one end being barred, the other constructed fit on the longer spear, but so contrived was that the spearman can readily detach it by a skillful jerk. Tied lightly to the center of each of the smaller spears was a bladder made from sealskin, blown full of air, the line attaching it being about 3 fathoms in length. I had hardly completed my investigation of the canoe, its crew, and contents, then, to my intense astonishment, the 4 Indians lifted me as they would a bale of fur or a barrel of pork, and without a word deposited me in the bottom of the canoe, where I was enjoined to sit, much in the same position enforced on a culprit in parish stock. I may mention incidentally that a canoe is not half as enjoyable as poets and novelists, who are prone to draw imaginary sketches, would lead the uninitiated to believe it would be impossible to trust oneself in a more uncomfortable, dangerous, damp, disagreeable kind of boat, generally designated a ferry brook, that rides, dances, glides, threads its silvery course over the seas, or arrow-like shoots foaming rapids. All a miserable delusion and a myth. Getting in, unless lifted as I was bodily like baggage, is to any but an Indian a dangerous and difficult process. The least preponderance of weight to either side, and you tumble out into the water to a certainty. Again, lowering oneself into the bottom is quite as bad, if not worse, requiring extreme care to keep an even balance, and a flexibility of back and limb seldom possessed by any save tumblers and tightrope dancers. Down safely, then, as I have said, you are compelled to sit in a most painful position, and the least attempt to alter it generally results in a sudden heeling over of the canoe when you find yourself sitting in a foot of cold water. We are off, and swiftly crossing the harbor, the beach rose indistinct in the distance. We still see the dusky forms of the Indians, the rough, gaudily painted huts, and the gleam of many lodge fires and wreaths of white smoke slowly ascending through the still air. The square, substantial pickets shunting in the trade forts, its roof and chimneys just peeping above, backed by the somber green of the pine trees. Altogether presented a picturesque novel and pretty in all its details. A few minutes and we rounded the jutting headland, keeping close along the rocky shore of the island, gliding past snug bays and cozy little landlocked harbors, the home and haunts of countless wildfowl. Soon we leave the shore and stand away to sea. The breeze is fresher here, and a ripple that would be nothing in a boat makes the flat-bottomed canoe unpleasantly lively, save a wetting from the spray, an occasional surge of water over the gunwale. All goes pleasantly. The faraway land is barely distinguishable in the gray haze. No canoes are to be seen in the dark blue water. The only sign of living thing is a flock of seals waging war on a shoal of fish. The distant spouting of a whale and the glossy backs of the blackfish as they roll lazily through the ripple. The line at the bow is uncoiled. A heavy stone is enclosed in a net attached to a sinker. Large hook made of bone and hardwood, baited with a piece of the octopus, is made fast to the long line by a piece of hemp cord. Then come a heavy plunge of the sinker, the rattle of the line as it runs over the side of the canoe, and we wait in silence for the unexpected bite. A tug that came unpleasantly near to setting all hands let us know that a halibut was bolting the tempting morsel, hook and all. A few minutes gave him the time fairly to swallow, and now a sudden twick buries the hook deeply in the fleshy throat. The huge flatbush finds to his cost that his dinner is likely seriously to disagree with him. Whilst in the canoe all hands are in full employ, the bowman kneeling holds on tightly with both hands to the line. An Indian next to him takes one of the long spears and quickly places on the end of it a shorter one, baited and bladdered. The other two paddle warily. At first the hooked fish was sulky and remains obstinately at the bottom, until continued jerks at the line ruffled his temper and excited his curiosity sufficiently to induce a sudden ascent to the surface, perhaps to have a peep at his persecutors. Awaiting his appearance stood the spearman. When the canoe was sufficiently near in, he sent the spear, plucking the long half or handle from the shorter barbed spear which remained in the fish. The bladder, floating like a life buoy, marking the fish's whereabouts. The halibut, finding his reception anything but agreeable, tries to descend again to the lower regions, a performance now difficult to accomplish, as his bladder is a serious obstacle. Soon, reappearing on the surface, another spear was sent into him, and so on until he was compelled to remain floating. During all this time, the paddlers, aided by the linemen, followed all the twistings and windings of the fish, as a greyhound courses on a doubling hare. For some time, the contest was a very equal one. After the huge fish was buoyed and prevented from diving on the one side of the halibut made desperate efforts to escape by fishing, and on the other, the Indians, keeping a tight line, made him tow the canoe. Evident signs of weariness at last began to exhibit themselves. His swimming became slower and slower, the attempts to escape more feeble and less frequent. Several times the canoe came close up to him, but a desperate struggle enabled him once more to get away. Again and again we were all but over the fish, literally flying through the water. Sometimes towed the canoe nearly under, and at others spun it suddenly around like a whipped top. Nothing but the wonderful dexterity of the paddles saved us from instant shipwreck and the certainty of drowning. I would have given much to have stood up, but no, if I had only moved on one side to peep over, a sudden yell from the steersman accompanied by a flourish of the braining club, mildly admonitory, no doubt, but vastly significant, in short, instant obedience. I forgot cold, wet, and fright, and indeed everything but all the all-absorbing excitement attendant of this ocean chase. The skill and tact of uneducated man pitted against a huge sea monster of tenfold strength, with the sight of a lover of sport would travel any distance to witness.